Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Real Host of Short-Term Rentals. We are an expert group from around the world, and each week we meet to talk about a different topic in the short-term rental industry. Today, we are very lucky to have a special guest. His name is Dan Bourdeau. Dan used to work for Google as a Google data scientist and has 15 years of forecasting experience and a strong background in real estate development and management. Dan co-founded the company Host Genie, which he's going to talk about today, and is the CEO of that platform. Host Genie leverages AI technology to help property investors maximize their returns and get their listings elevated to the top of the market. So, Dan, a very big welcome to you today on our show.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, and thanks for everybody for having me on.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of background. How did you get started with Host Genie?
So Host Genie was born out of my own competitive desire to launch #1 listings. And for people consistently asking for my help in predicting revenue for their properties they were acquiring and helping them optimize their listings. Back when I worked at Google, I ran an internal real estate short-term rental group and, kind of pro bono advised countless people on how they can launch #1 listings like I was able to. And as I transitioned out of my W-2, it was a natural thing to start up a company that did it more officially. We consider ourselves the foremost experts in revenue forecasting for your property, which is relative to the property you have, the experience you have as a manager, the money you're bringing to the table, and obviously like the location and attributes about that property. We also help people optimize existing properties. So if someone has an underperforming property wanting to reinvest into it, they want to know what kind of upside there is if they reinvest and where the best areas to put their money. We produce on a report basis analytics that helps answer that question.
So I can actually talk to this directly because I have a home that I am in the process of setting up in Asheville, North Carolina. And I reached out to you, Dan, to analyze this home. And you asked me how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what area it was in. And then my understanding is that you did a competitive analysis to look at other similar type properties of this size to figure out not only the pricing, but also to figure out the avatar that would stay at the house so that you could then advise on what key amenities to put into the house. So maybe you can give a little bit of insight into how you hone down that avatar.
Sure. Like with any good business, hyper targeting a customer avatar is probably the most important starting point. And short-term rentals is no different. And you guys have probably seen this. A lot of people just set up their house generically. They're like, well, my target is everybody. And the old mantra is if you're targeting everybody, you're targeting nobody. So one of the first things we do is scrape the reviews from all of your top competitors in your market. Airbnb actually gives us some clues as to who your target avatar should be. The reviews are labeled. A group trip with adults or a family with kids are the two major categories for larger properties. So by aggregating and counting how many of groups are staying, especially at the top earning properties, we can start to learn who is the predominant traveler. Now, beach markets are often families, and a place like Asheville, there's actually a lot of groups of adults. A place like Nashville is a lot of groups of adults. And a place like Chicago is also a place with a lot of adults. My theory about amenitizing a property is that you want to put high value amenities that your target demographic, the one that makes up the largest proportion of travelers, will pay extra for. Here in Chicago, we wouldn't put any kids' playscapes in the backyard. We wouldn't put kids' bunks. We wouldn't put a kids' playroom because that wouldn't have a lot of incremental value to the guests. So I do think that is probably the most important place to start, and that's how we do it.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think that you must see a lot of different markets because I'm sure that people from around the country, I don't know if it's outside of the U.S. or it's just in the U.S., but maybe in terms of having that visibility, what have you seen about different markets that you're looking at?
In terms of what specifically target demographics?
I guess in terms of demographics, popularity, any sort of insights that you have on if somebody's looking right now and they want to purchase a short-term rental, but they don't know where to purchase that rental, what would you advise?
Well, I like to think of it as a big algorithm from a data science perspective. And you have to answer a couple questions from the top, and it starts to lead you in different directions. The first kind of questions you have to answer is this a pure investment property, or is this one that you want to use yourself? If it's one you want to use yourself, it should be in a place that you kind of like, right? If you like to go to the mountains, it should be in the mountains. If you like the beach, it should be in a beach. And if you want to buy it for pure investment purposes, like then you really need to start distilling it through, where is a good place to buy from a yield perspective? Where is a good place to buy from a home value perspective? We're in a really unique housing market, as a lot of you know, in the US, where my personal opinion is that there is a massive generational bubble, the biggest since 2008, occurring in many sectors of the US, especially in Florida, in Texas, Tennessee are probably the biggest three. And in the Midwest, where I am, we're really not in a large bubble. And I define a bubble as largely the ratio between incomes and home prices, although some markets are more investor driven and are less reliant on local incomes. If I was buying a short-term rental today, which I just gave a big presentation of last week to a bunch of investors, I would start with where am I likely to get appreciation, and where is it not a huge bubble? And then, where is it legal? From there, maybe there's some personal preference on top of that. I want to be able to gross at least 20% with the property, and it should be in a place with relatively investor-friendly regulations.
Great, great. I do want to touch on the fact that your company leverages AI. So AI is all over the place now. It's in the news. It's positive. It's negative. So talk to us a little bit about how you utilize AI for what you do.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, with AI, the danger of it is it's a hallucination and it producing inaccurate results. So our theory at Host Genie is that there always needs to be a human expert on top of the AI, validating and analyzing and essentially checking all of its results. The main place that we use AI is amenity labeling. And if you acquire short-term rental data from any of the providers out there, it includes tags for are there amenities or not. But those tags are largely self-reported. They're people checking check boxes on their Airbnb listing. And humans are notoriously bad at checking all the check boxes. So do they have a pool? Do they have a hot tub? But also there's an issue with this data is that it doesn't include what I like to say are the really important amenities. There are no tags for if there's a game room. There are no tags for if there's a theater room. There are no tags for a playscape outside or a fire pit, really. So we use AIs to parse through photos and text and create binary variables for the presence of amenities in all of your competition so that we can then run machine learning to then say, can we calculate the value of a revenue impact of having a fire pit or having a game room or a theater room in Asheville, for example, so that we can provide additional evidence for investors that want to make investments into their house to help justify why you should put a nice big theater room in Asheville. It's because it's associated with a $10,000 to $20,000 lift in revenue. And we can only get that answer if we can, either by manually or with AI create these variables to check for the presence of amenities.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's a great use of the technology for that. And one other question that I have before I expand it to the group, I know that the rest of you also probably have questions for Dan, but that is, at what stage in the process, if I'm looking to purchase a short-term rental, at what stage in the process would I come to you? Would it be prior to looking at any of the markets? Would it be once I've found a market? Would it be once I've purchased a property? When would I approach Host Genie?
So there's probably three stages that we work most commonly with investors. One is when they're searching. So if you are interested in buying in Chicago and Chicago is probably the market you really want to buy in, we produce more advanced market reports using this AI and machine learning, especially to extract and summarize the key amenities and locations, as well as find the value of all of your competitors' houses that they bought. We produce market reports that help answer the question, where's the best place to buy in this market? And what is the best bedroom count, location, zip code, based off of all the competitive analysis. So that's the search phase. Once you have identified a target that meets those criteria, investors either pre-contract or just after they go under contract, they purchase our evaluation report, which gives a low, mid, high revenue forecast driven by a human analyst and a full underwriting report before you can get out of the inspection to help prove to you that the home will make enough to justify it. And then usually when people pass the inspection, they order our optimization report, or slightly even before that sometimes, which is like a 40-page document that outlines exactly how you set this property up. It's often the input for a designer, like when I did your property. We hand that over to the designer. It answers the key questions. Who should you target for demographic? What beds should go in what areas? What amenities are important? We even write your title and description for you and produce a lot of analytics to help you with your pricing strategy.
Great. So it really is in all three stages of the home buying process. So let's expand this to the rest of the real hosts. Guys, what questions do you guys have for Dan that he can
Yeah, I've got two things, Dan. The first one is I feel like so many people in different markets are now running into issues with cities and ordinances that are kind of making it hard for them to actually do short-term rentals. So it's either becoming illegal or they have to get a permit, but even that permit is only limited to maybe like 120 days, like similar to San Francisco or Los Angeles. So lots of people are relying on that midterm rental, anything that's 30-day plus. Do you guys have any data with any midterm rentals? And if not, is that in the pipeline for you guys?
No, we typically just specialize in short-term rentals and stay away from midterm rentals. And on regulations, I mean, there's different types of markets in different stages of their regulation cycle, right? There's like the Seviervilles that have been short-term rentals markets way before Airbnb, and they're never going to get legislated out. There's like the big cities that are almost all getting the hotel lobbies, like Chicago, are coming down hard and saying it has to be your primary residence. You might have to live there. And those are typically more mature regulation markets too, where you can do one short-term rental in Chicago and call it your primary and live in part of it, or just use it as your vacation home, but call it your primary. So you have to understand what type of market you're entering and where the regulations are. I like the more classical mountain markets that are near tourist attractions that rely on tourism. I am in some wild, wild west markets where there's no license, there's no regulations. They could legislate me out of existence, but it's highly unlikely due to the fact that the area relies so heavily on tourism. So I think on regulations, you really stay away from the biggest cities. But if you cross a line, a zoning line, you go from Chicago to Evanston or go from Chicago, one of these little suburbs, like everything changes. So there are all these little hacks around regulations, but it is a constantly evolving world and something to be hyper aware of when you're investing.
Yeah, I like that. I think lots of people who are going into different markets look at the big cities and forget that there's the ancillary areas around it that actually do allow for short-term rentals. And so just doing that research is really important. And my other question is, I also came from a tech background, and this is a little bit away from the actual Host Genie part of it, but more on your story. So I was also doing the tech. I was in NVIDIA for 6 years doing sales operations, coming up with forecasting and process modeling. I mean, I think your listeners would be super interested and find some value in hearing about like a piece of your story coming from that tech background and environment. And what was that transition like from Google then to doing short-term rentals? And
well, for me, I wanted to go into entrepreneurship early, but I didn't know how to do it out of school. So I took a more traditional route of being an analyst and started doing forecasting for a business demand at various Fortune 500 companies. And to me, Google was always a dream job. Like I worked for 10 years and got a master's degree so that I could get hired there, and finally did. And I got a job well more junior than the job I had that paid 2 or 3 times amount. But I went from being kind of a big man on campus to like the smallest cog in the biggest machine ever. So I didn't get a lot of satisfaction, even though I got enough money finally to start investing in real estate and start my entrepreneurship journey. I got very little satisfaction from working at Google because the global forecasting I was doing essentially got thrown in the trash. And they're like, I don't believe it. I'm like, but it's accurate. For me, there's nothing more satisfying than building something that you own and run and drive. And that's what led me to leave. And my philosophy was that if you can replace a sum or a growing amount of your tech salary with various pieces of real estate or consulting companies or whatnot, and show yourself that you can grow, it's better to make a bet on yourself, and you'll get more satisfaction betting on yourself than you will working at a big tech company. So that's what led me out. And I've been 3 or 4 years out, and wouldn't turn back for anything.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I also wouldn't turn around and go back.
What was your transition out of NVIDIA like?
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into it, just because I want to save some time for you. But it was easy. I kind of share a similar mindset to you, where I wanted to build something on my own and be able to grow something that wasn't bound to my salary. So that's kind of how I decided to move forward with my entrepreneurship journey. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. This was the next and best step for me.
Sergio or Michael, do you have any questions specifically for Dan?
Well, yeah, I was wondering, so separately from investing, do you work with people who already have properties? For example, someone who has an underperforming property, how would you approach that? And what kind of things would you look at? And what would you offer them for advice? And how would that work?
Yeah, good question. So we call it our optimization report. It does apply to either if you're setting up a property now or if you have an underperforming property. And what we do with existing properties is we try to benchmark you across what I consider the key pillars against your competition. We benchmark your design, essentially rank it. Where do you rank in design? Where do you rank in amenities? And where do you rank in the sophistication of your management? Do you have smart pricing? Does it seem fairly optimized? Is your minimum stay fairly optimized? Is your listing, the photos, the description? So we benchmark you against the competition, and then we identify your key deficiencies. Maybe you're highly under amenitized. Maybe you have far fewer beds and occupancy than all your competition. Maybe you're not using smart pricing, or maybe all of those things are true. And then we try to generate an upside, and that upside is often relative to what is missing. Are there low-hanging fruit missing that are easy to plug, or are there expensive things missing, like you have a 6-bedroom in Asheville, but you didn't put a fire pit, a game room, a hot tub, a theater room? You're missing all of these key things. So we take the budget that an investor has to reinvest in their property and recommend what we think are the optimal things to invest, and suggest what we believe is the higher price that you could charge and the resulting annual revenue, to show you that it's worth investing or it's not worth investing 10, 20, $30,000 into your property because there isn't a 10, 20, $30,000 upside.
So basically you get this report, and then there's also the suggestions resulting from the report. Is that like a 2-step process, or how does that work? Is it like a contractual thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, we're not contractors, and we don't actually go into your listing and make changes. So you'll get a massive report of, here's the low hanging fruit, the check boxes that you need to go check is, new photos, lifestyle photos, new titles and descriptions, smart pricing. And as an investor, you'll have to go through yourself and make those updates to your listing. Or if we suggest amenities, we'll give you the bill of materials for what it looks like and what you should buy. What would a high quality fire pit look like? Buying the chairs from Polywood and using the bright colors, and what's an estimate for the cost of the gravel and landscaping and string lights that you need. So we're delivering you suggestions and bill of materials for you to go implement yourself.
I see. So essentially it's the report that you'd be getting. And then does that include like the actual information on the competitors as well?
Correct. It has an entire competitor section, which uses our extraction of amenities. It's listing out how many beds and occupancy they have, as well as benchmarking you within those competitor sets. So you get the competitor analysis, as well as essentially we'll rip apart your current listing. We'll essentially deliver to you what you're deficient on.
Yeah, that sounds great.
To add to that, maybe you touch base on it for the amenities, because anyone can say, oh, add a fireplace. Anyone can say add a pool. Do you guys recommend certain brands that you see? Because the fireplace isn't the same fireplace, a fire pit, right? So do you guys recommend some either operationally and aesthetically these work very well? Do you guys have that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I've done a couple videos over like tier list within fire pits and tier list within game rooms, because not every amenity is made the same. Not every fire pit will generate the same amount of revenue if you put the cheap plastic chairs. Not every game room or theater room will generate the same revenue. So when we put together a suggestion and you have a certain budget, we'll match the budget to the different tiers that are possible. So if you have a very low budget, like this client right here has very, very, very little budget for amenities, and in that case, we'll recommend one of the lower cost packages for a fire pit, such as like, the propane fire pit with probably some plastic chairs. But, when I upgraded my mountain cabin with a fire pit, it was like, the $5,000 to $9,000 version with the expensive polywood chairs. And we'll show you images of what the top amenities of that category in both your local market and nationally. So it's not just do a fire pit. It's here's what TechFester's fire pit does, that after I was an analyst for some of the biggest funds in short-term rentals that experimented a lot. And I'll show you the result of all the experimentation. Here is what a fire pit should look like. And here are the list of materials that goes into it and the brand of chair that I would buy.
Also, I know it depends per market, right? But being that you've analyzed quite a bit markets, I'm curious, any like common amenities that you've seen, regardless of what market you've seen an increase where it's safe to say this will get you an ROI. How much depends on your market and so forth, but just curious.
Yeah. Well, the big three that I can give out to anyone that works in almost every market, not every market you can do this in, but it's the fire pit, the game room, and the hot tub, right? And my basic theory about amenities is that amenities will drive incremental value if your target customer will pay for it in the real world. So when you go to an arcade bar, they charge you to go there. When you go to a pool hall, they charge you per hour. When you go to the theater, they charge you. Having that amenity private in your house is what drives that incremental value. Same with going to the mini golf course, right? It costs $25 to $45 per head. So if me and 8 of my friends are renting a house that has it's logical to see why people will pay incremental. And how much they will pay incremental depends on how important that is to your customer demographic, right? How big your house is. And there's some rules of thumb, like, buying a house with a pool, generally you will see a 30% lift over a house without a pool. Hot tub, the data suggests about a $50 per night. But again, this varies depending on if you have a 2-bedroom house, it's going to be less. If you have a 5-bedroom house, it might be a bit more. So it's hard to paint broad strokes, but with those 3 key amenities, maybe except for Florida with the hot tubs, they work in city markets, mountain markets, suburbs, like, if every single host just put a high quality fire pit in their backyard, it would generate, probably the quote on good amenities is anywhere from a 50 to a 150% return on revenue. So if you put a 5K fire pit in your backyard, it will likely drive $2,500 to $10,000 worth of incremental revenue. It's more of a percent, but those are some numbers we could throw out.
Adding to that, I'm a big believer just with anything, optimizing any business is what's your quickest and your cheapest way to get the majority of essentially the result that you're looking for, right? So I'm curious because not everyone has 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 to be thrown into amenities and so forth. On just a best bang for your buck, if we want to optimize a listing that's current, what would you suggest on quickest and cheapest route?
I mean, more beds is the easiest way. There's a high correlation, and all the regressions that I've ever run show that one of the primary drivers of revenue is the amount of people that you can sleep. There's a cap on that. We don't want to have much more than 5 heads per bathroom, although you can stretch that a bit. And I think like the cheap fire pit is. But like more than that, it's really the low hanging fruit for almost every host is professional photos. And if you're not taking professional photos, that's the cheapest, easiest way. Smart pricing is also probably the other low hanging fruit. Studies suggest smart pricing drives about a 20% revenue lift over trying to do it yourself. So if you don't have good photos, you don't have smart pricing, you're just leaving a lot of money on the table for a really low cost.
With smart pricing, you mean like Price Labs, Wheelhouse, Beyond?
Wheelhouse, Price Labs, any algorithmic pricing software other than manually setting weekdays and weekends. You're going to miss when Taylor Swift comes into town charging 3x what you should have charged.
And you don't recommend using the Airbnb?
No.
smart
I think
price?
it's a huge trap. incentives is to just get you booked at any price. And I had a friend in Chicago who had a four bedroom house, and he gave it to Airbnb Smart Pricing. They sold 80% of his calendar out immediately on the rest of the year, and he should have been grossing, by my estimates, 120 to 150, and he only did about 65K in his first year. He switched to Smart Pricing in his second year, did 125 to $130,000. So it's just, you should never really use Airbnb Smart Pricing, even though they might give you a small ranking boost for it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I was joking, but I wanted to bring it up because for those people who are watching this and who think that Airbnb is after their best interests, it's not. As you say, Airbnb is after their own interests, and it's after getting
If
as
you're
much
not booked,
commission
they're
as
not
they
going to get
can.
their 14%. And if you are booked, they will. And they don't really care about maximizing the amount you get. They just want to make sure they get that percent.
I want to ask you, Dan, a high level question, and this is not necessarily directly related to Host Genie, but since you have 15 years of forecasting experience and we are going into a swervy market or whatever you might call it in terms of people not knowing where the economy is going. So how does that correlate with your thoughts about short-term rentals this year and next year? Do you have any thoughts about the market in general?
My forecast for home prices, like I mentioned, in like Texas, Florida, a lot of the Sun Belt, I really would stay far away from that. Now, that's too broad of a stroke. There's always houses and strategies and ways you can make it work in different markets, but I view real estate as kind of a dividend stock almost. I mean, it's a highly active managed one, short-term rentals, but you want the stock price to go up and you want there to be a decent dividend on it. And if you're buying a home in Florida right now, I would estimate a 25% drop over the next 12 to 18 months in home prices. I mean, supply is just spiking through the roof and investors are staying away and locals can't afford it. My thought for 2025 is avoid the massive bubble real estate markets. And, we're likely to enter a recession. The probability of a recession keeps going up. JP Morgan's just said it was 35%. I think they're underestimating it personally, but in a recession, the spending on travel per family goes down by 20, 30, 40%. And we're also in a political market where a lot of international travelers are staying away, and that's really hurting houses that are maybe trafficked by a lot of Canadians and markets that get a lot of international travelers. So my favorite strategy for 2025 is to go the Northeast and the Midwest in regional drive-to markets that are not in an obvious bubble, because it's easier to take a drive-to vacation in a recession than it is to fly to Hawaii and take a vacation there. So I think we all should expect occupancy to continue softening a little bit. But if you are investing this year, you might want to take those two factors into consideration.
Great advice. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it will be a softer rental market this year because of that. And it's difficult to know what will happen next year, but at least we've got a short to medium term perspective in mind.
Recessions last 12 to 18 months, and then spending comes right back though. So if you're not preparing for the surge afterward, like, you're also going to miss out.
Yeah. Good point. Any last questions for Dan before we end off this episode?
I got two, one quick and one longer. Quick, you mentioned lifestyle photos. Do you see that work in every market? Do you see that work in some markets versus others? And then, like, what kind of ROI do you see with that?
So it's definitely been an evolving topic. I think 5 years ago, people were saying you do not do lifestyle photos. They don't work. And I think a lot of the evidence and testing that I have seen, which is on a smaller scale, like even the biggest funds like TechVestor, they don't do lifestyle photos in all their listings, but I think it's smart. And I do see an ROI. Just like with anything, it's really difficult to pinpoint and extrapolate to every single type of market. But it is an emphasis point for me and my investors. The new builds that I do, the A-frames and the geodomes that I build, I want to get lifestyle photos in them. And I want those people to look like the average booker that I want to get into my property. I stand head and shoulders above most of my competition in relatively low competition markets because I check all the boxes, including lifestyle photos. And they're not cheap. Like, for me, it costs like $600 to have the photographer bring out, a bunch of people from town for that 2, 3, 4 hour shoot. But I think most hosts under invest in marketing. And if you think of a fixed cost of $600, Is that going to generate $600 extra in revenue? I think there's an incredibly high chance it generates a multiple of that in revenue for myself. So I view it in the bucket of like professional photos, but taking it to the next level and really making sure that people can imagine themselves. We're not just trying to sell a home like we're listing it. We're trying to sell an experience, and we're trying to get them to visualize themselves in the home. So I can't quote you exactly what it drives, but I believe strongly in it.
Is that your hero shot, or is that within your first 5? How do you kind of
The
finesse
hero
that?
shot depends. If you have a really sweet backyard, like what one Lawrence is setting up, like the drone shot of the backyard is typically the hero shot. And the lifestyle photos are typically sprinkled in. No more than like 10, 20% of the photos should really be lifestyle photos, though. You don't want to oversaturate with all lifestyle photos. The hero shot really is kind of market and property dependent, but you want to show off the best, most interesting thing about your house. It's rarely the front of your house, which I see people do a lot.
So I have an add-on question to what Sergio just asked, and that is, can you give the key examples of lifestyle, of good photos to take with people in them?
Yeah. That's something we do in our reports. If we say do lifestyle photos, we'll grab competitors that have them locally or national best practices that we have seen people do and say, this is how they should be set up. There's different types of lifestyle photos. One has people in them, and one just has like the grill set with food everywhere, right? And the bathtub with the candles in it with the board over it. So at the very least, you like setting the table with all of the plates and stuff. So you at least want to do that type of lifestyle photos, but if you can, you want to do the next tier up.
While we're on the realm of marketing, just curious from another expert, obviously someone who helps a lot of investors, what are your thoughts on hiring a marketing agency or getting someone in-house and just leveraging the OTAs? Because people can go really wrong. I feel the same way with like direct booking. Is you can invest all of this money into Google ads, social media ads, and so forth, and if you're only getting a small percentage more of direct bookings, are you really saving more than you're spending, and so forth? Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're spending, Airbnb's taken a huge chunk of it. That's marketing. That should be considered a marketing budget, VRBO, and so forth. So curious on your thoughts on that whole dilemma. Is it worth getting an agency or so forth?
I've never hired an agency before. My opinion on marketing is that there's a cost to acquiring any customer, right? Like you mentioned, you pay Airbnb 3% to acquire a customer. You pay VRBO 8%. I think it's very difficult for the average host to get a significant amount of direct bookings. It requires really good social media, maybe some influencers getting out. That's really the only way I've been successful building direct booking is to get local influencers that look like my target demographic in my market I'm pulling from to come out and to have a good direct booking site. I've never hired an agency, so yeah, I can't really speak to that side of things.
I think we've covered a realm of different questions here. Dan, your company again is Host Genie, and if people are interested in contacting you or in getting a report from Host Genie, where would they go for that?
They can go to hostgenie.ai and you can book a free consult with me or order directly off the website.
Great. Everyone, thank you again for joining us. We meet once a week. We talk about a different topic each week. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like it. Please share it with people who you know who would benefit from this. And join us again next week when we do a different topic for the real hosts of short-term rentals. Thank you again, and goodbye for now.
Thanks for having me.